Hello and welcome to refined Antichrist dismissal, biblical dismissal address, March 2021. My name is Berlinghoff Rasputin III, and I'm an informal yeast infection on Rudeport Murdoch's claimed to be a journalist of repute of respectability. The reasons I call him Rudeport Murdoch are twofold and controversial, each controversial as the other. Firstly, I call him I'm glad to not be working at that campus again. It was I would always hate talk of any kind that meant implicit to or by absolute direct contingency on what they were saying meant you are now surveyed within in violation of your rights to privacy and to an unestablished sense of parameter. As if to say our invasion of your privacy may begin here but will certainly end here, and that never been defined in any way. Plus then them thinking and getting off to thinking evidently that they can go, well, this video of his, if surely it must mean that what he's saying each time he's talking about beliefs or trying to establish a trust, the words he's using are lies or lying. It's I've already responded back to that and said, well, I've already responded at the deepest principle, which was even related to the interviews going on concerning that art piece at the time. That art's a question mark and not an answer, which means to spur on further and inspire further thought. Now, that's immediately wedged in my case when it's been said to the rest of you that, so this language of he suffers from an illness caused by a video. It's like if I said if you suffered an illness caused by walking, or your view of yourself walking, then does that mean and I go, now why don't you walk to the shops to get your prescription? Are you, it's like me dealing with the infernality of, now why don't you watch this medical program that will talk about how video causes mental disorders. Watch it on our video. Well, by your own admission, I shouldn't believe it. If or I'll suffer from it, or what, or it's lying. These are the, what I'm saying is, but both respects at the how Christianity began and how it ended, the two peaks. The Twin Peaks, the 4,000-year-old kingdom. So they had no pathology labs, they had no tests to prove bloodlines were dirty or bloodlines were pure. They had they had policies saying if you see someone's open wound, spit in it to help them clean. So when it came for kingdoms keeping bloodlines pure, they inbred. Now that's true history behind why they would write the Genesis myth to the people of the day, and inbreeding themselves out of history is how they would have then, the scrolls made it to the commoners and then on to you. Now, so that's why that story's fucked up, psychosexually fucked up in terms of historic reality and in terms of its content. Are you to believe it as genuine theology? And so then the 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 apocrypha and the gradient from what emerges after Mark's gospel, of a slave being charged with being a king, have been a puzzle left to explain. Well, innate to in being inbred by whether by practice or idealism or both, is the elimination of the opposite type of heart, and the most opposite type of heart is that of a bisexual. So Christianity amounting to why now bisexuals aren't thought of as natural. It's something Christianity has certainly, yeah. It's like something they've thrown in as like, well, we've burnt witches during the Middle Ages. We've burnt people trying to translate the Bible into English. We've burnt a lot of heretics. We've laughed as, like, Galileo gets called a heretic and then dies, and then the church drops the heresy charges in the 1990s. So it's like someone told his skeleton that he was no longer a heretic, and they're still celebrating now. There's wine and cheese. All the parents whose babies died before they could get them baptized, and there used to be a Catholic teaching of a place called limbo, where the young had not yet proven themselves worthy to go to heaven, but had not violated enough or committed enough offenses through the violation of what was thought to be their God-given free will, that they didn't deserve eternal punishment in hellfire or damnation either. And so this void, intermediary void called limbo, was invented, and it created a lot of hysteria amongst religious parents, because they would think, well, my child then isn't with God at all, but and then the priest would be like, yeah, but at least your child isn't being eternally tortured. You must not want that for them. And the parents would be like, so at the best of times it was an insult to parents, but then a wave of hysteria occurs again when the church redacts the teaching of limbo and says, no, limbo doesn't really exist. It's just heaven and hell. And so the church, the next day, they're ready to be to speak the perfect, infallible word all over again, and insist they have never made them, as if they've never made one fucking mistake. Now, where was I? Yeah, so that these Apocrypha Gospels, Thomas, Peter, Judas, Mary Magdalene, that collection of Gospels aren't in the Bible, and that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are, with all of their irreconcilable differences. It means that the reason that the Apocrypha Gospels aren't in the Bible has absolutely nothing to do with irreconcilable differences, because you can't have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John together in the same book with irreconcilable differences, so contradictions that can't be fixed, can't be resolved, and you can't then turn and say, so therefore we haven't included the Gospels of Mary Magdalene, Judas, Peter, and Thomas, because we want storyline consistency. It can't be for want of storyline consistency. Or they would be forced to strike out all but one gospel from the canon as it is now. Granted, they would have their pick at it and probably would pick John for what they like to say is the overall biblical message. I predicted that, at the moment they're trying to do things like attack foundational ideas to definitions of existentialism. They're trying to speak out against nihilism, anarchism, individualism, and say that, well, you need to be against these things because you need you need a teacher and a Lord to lead your life. You need Jesus. But the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible is saying things like there is nothing new under the sun. Already it's quite nihilistic. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. It's very similar to Nietzsche's be very wary of the teachers of the purpose of existence. So this is a book in the Bible that's very Nietzsche. So the question remains, well, what purpose does the book of Ecclesiastes have? And I think it's like a fallback. It's like if people truly explore and go, well, divine attributes and incoherence means that God can't be all-knowing and all-powerful and give us free will unless he planned out every behavioral move, every thought and feeling that inspired our every choice of every type of thinking, our every emotional response to every thought. God would have known about them all and God would have created them all. So we can't have a God with infinite knowledge, infinite power, and human free will. They can't coexist. Nor can this succession of for everything that exists, there has to be a cause for its existence. The universe exists, therefore what caused the universe? God caused the universe. And so now the premise that demanded the introduction of God as the solution to that equation was the axiom for everything has to have a cause. So then if you reply, well then what was the cause of God? What or who was the cause of God? And then if a religionist turns back and says, well, God doesn't require or need to be caused, then they've sold out and forfeited their own premise that for entry into this debate, or to indemnify their argument that everything requires a cause. If they go God needs no cause, then you can say, well, the universe is like all about particles and blah blah blah. Perhaps maybe the universe shall just be, we're even getting told it's going to expand to a certain amount and then contract back in on itself. Red Dwarf looked into it, time was even running backwards. It was all a great it was an adventure, all right. So so the first cause argument ends up in circular ad infinitum fallacies. The other prominent one on people's consciences when they get out of church or are on the fringe is if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere at the same time, why does he allow evil? And the question's even framed nicer than God deserves, because it's in the book of Isaiah. You'll read him saying, I create evil, and I cause woe. I, the Lord, do all of these things. So it's not a question of is God allowing evil when you go to Scripture. It's that he's stating directly that he causes all suffering by his own admittance. In Isaiah, the 45th chapter, um, all forms of woe and suffering and all types of evil uh, God causes. Um, he does all of these things. So that leaves you. See, so Bible studies are either going to become they're gonna lie about how much they put their Bibles down and put recovery pornos on, or they're gonna become invested in psychopathic characters. And this is why I wish I'd spent some more time just sort of doing school, but also working on like setting myself assignments to debunk Christians online, so that I was both spending more time at school and not feeling pressured to work, because I wanted to bludgeon the trace out of my mind to any intensive theologian. I didn't want to cross paths with another. Yeah. So it's even divine attributes and incoherence is a theological field of inquiry that's concerned to the positive or the more explicit leanings of atheism, which is negative atheism is sort of where you're not going to be you're no activist. People you're in a community where people want you in their church, so they're approaching you, but you know how to say a thing or two in defense of why. And even before we had relativity addressing the Big Bang, before we had Charles Darwin and evolution. I mean, evolution even goes back to ancient Greek thought, where ancient Greeks were observing other animals and supposing that we were merely a more complex type of animal. They just had no empirical work done. Now, David Hume was a pure logician, and what he came up with was prior to the discoveries of Darwin and prior to Big Bang Theory. And he said that you can examine a form of logistics thrown at you, and you can examine it and you can say, well, this is very elaborate, this is very it's more wordy than a church pamphlet. But the logic, as far as the logicality of it goes, I'm not convinced. Dawkins talks about this. He goes, an atheist before Charles Darwin could have said, I have no clue how we got here. However, the explanation that you've put forward is not good enough. It doesn't mean, my former youth pastor was very much behind this type of thinking, saying, go to your school and if anyone comes up to you saying, can you prove that God exists? Turn back at them and say, can you prove that he doesn't? Bertrand Russell in the early 1900s had dealt with this by a teapot analogy, where he said if the rings of Saturn contained the claim that there was a teapot hovering on a saucer somewhere within Saturn's rings, can you prove that the teapot's there? No. Can you rule out that? Can you establish as a fact that the teapot definitely isn't there? You can't do that either. So is it wise then to believe that the teapot is there? because are you able to, you're unable to claim that the teapot definitely is not there. So because you can't claim the teapot is definitely not there, is it wise for you to believe that this teapot is orbiting Saturn, existing in the rings of Saturn? And you would say no. And this was sort of David Hume's logic, and Dawkins credited him on it. He said, so long as Earth resting on the back of a giant turtle seems silly to us, but Galileo was called a heretic back in his day because he wanted to say that Earth was not like a baby's cradle center of the universe, because the church wanted to say Earth was at the center of the universe and not that Earth was rotating around the sun in a solar system. So Galileo died, had been mocked and called a heretic by the church, and then in the early 1990s, the church drops the charge of heresy. Well, they'd already dropped him 6 feet under. So I hope he enjoyed his fucking. You think he enjoyed his award, or is it still orbiting his remains? So yes, so Dawkins would say an atheist prior to Darwin, and this would extend by analogy comparably to the Big Bang, because the two big metaphysics problems for philosophers have been how do humans exist, and how does the universe exist? So they move from one to the other, the former to the latter, and yeah, following the logic of David Hume, Dawkins said an atheist before Darwin could have said, well, I have read various accounts from various religions and I find none of them convincing. I don't find this book of Genesis to be convincing at all. It's quite disgusting. So I may not. The onus probandi, or the burden of proof, is always falls back to the claimant or the one asserting the truth of a proposition. So if someone's asserting that a proposition is true to you, then it's their onus to convince you that they're right, not their cunning to effect an immediate reversal and challenge you to prove that they're wrong, or else feel expected or obliged to join them in belief anyway, having failed to prove them wrong. So an atheist could just follow Hume's type of logic. Hume was a great logician, and say, well, it's wiser from my perspective to say, why not suspend our judgment and await until a better explanation of the facts has been attained or achieved, or presents itself, or is made presentable. But there is validity in saying, this explanation you brought me, that Earth is on the back of a giant turtle, is shit. Like, it's a shit house argument. So you can do that with how and why to human. Oh, but yeah, and then Dawkins added, Darwin, however, since made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, because and as he discusses it, it's not just about randomness. Christians like to read. I think it's more random in a Christian's head. Like, how does my God love me is a random question to ask, because given all his powers and things like that, And given all his knowledge, your free will claim is even more random. It's like 24,000 random killings of children under the age of 5 every day is about how impressed we should be with your church's free will arguments. Um, you know, so instead they transpose religionists often transpose the traits that they hate in their own religion, but don't want to admit explicitly, onto the enemy image of whatever other types of contrary ideologies they feel obliged to scrutinize or dismiss. So, yeah, so Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. And that's only improved more with Big Bang cosmology since then as well. No. Now, concerning the Apocrypha and canonical gospel divide, what this is about is I'm not sure if committee. I mean, we know that committees are the ones to choose what books go into, what scrolls go into what the next version of the Bible and what ones don't. So you know, leaving out the Apocrypha. It means leaving out it means things like leaving out the alleged point of view of the woman closest to Jesus, the individual closest to Jesus, of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or its authenticity is rejected. But how do they know its authenticity is rejected unless there's wiser arguments that Mary Magdalene was invented, or that and that you know his mother, Mary the Virgin, is concealing of this, or that all the Marys that discovered Jesus after he rose from the dead and rolled away the stone to the tomb, and this ensemble of Marys, but for whatever reason, and there are worse books than the Apocrypha in the Bible as it stands. There are books saying women must never speak in church. If a woman has a question, she can wait until the service is ended and ask her husband at home, because it's a disgrace to the Lord that a woman shall speak in church. As Christ is the head of the church, so is man to be the head of women in all things. Those are in Corinthians, writings by St. Paul, who is thought a repressed homo by many. Bishop Spong, Hannibal Lecter, they both seem to think. He was also to write that homosexuality is a response from God that you failed to worship him properly. So if he turns you into a homosexual, you weren't able to worship God properly. Now, anyone who believed that, and Paul was one who did. Paul lived in a time where if he was to say that he was gay openly, he'd be stoned to death. Probably by the fear to live or not be caught being the friend of an openly gay person, and his best friend would betray him for a bit of money and get him stoned to death. So he would have been at heart always on the run. So what that does then is you gawk when you become aware that Roger Toll and Gary Cahn's idea of a homosexual male is to entail misogyny or the positive dislike of women. That's because that's something I think that was outgrown. I don't think that they necessarily. I mean, early day Sulu from Star Trek was wanting to do a scene where he kissed a man on the bridge to the USS Enterprise, the Starship Enterprise in the 60s. But the network was already dealing with enough controversial phone calls saying, why is a nigger woman at a command station on your ship bridge? Nichelle Nichols as Uhura inspired Whoopi Goldberg to be an actress. So this transracial stance in conjunction with women's rights furthering was seen to be enough controversy dealt with by the network that a gay kiss was. So the canon versus the Apocrypha may mean things like the committee that assembles is taking orders and wishes to control which content you're able to attribute to Jesus. Not that these were inspired texts by either first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth hand references to him. The papyrus, if you look at the papyrus manuscript, which you can with a concordance, or you check with biblical historians, they'll show you that Mark's the scrolls for Saint Mark's Gospel, they're written in Koine Greek symbols, and so what they have is that chunks and chunks of symbols written in Koine Greek, not English. They could be translated into English into a bunch of various rephrasings, as I think they possibly are, in order to obfuscate people putting together perhaps the well, hang on, isn't this very repetitious of this region of Matthew's and this region of Luke's Gospel? But you're allowed to ask difference to what extent, and if to push the agenda of Jesus Christ the Savior were that strong, then removal of the Gospel of Mark altogether might have taken place some time ago. An idiot test that a Bible lover can run on themselves is if they think Matthew's was written first, it just means that they're used to and entranced by a page count where they go, the New Testament, and the first book is Matthew. But that's just ordering a table of, they don't know a table of contents from time of chronology. As to going back to these Koine Greek symbols, so you find 90% of the Gospel of Mark is copied verbatim. That means word for word, just not in English, in Koine Greek, word for word. It reappears in the Gospel of Matthew, and 70% of it reappears in the Gospel of Luke. Where those chunks reappear, in between the chunks are added paragraphs like miracle this and miracle that, and extra teaching this and extra teaching that, and but what it means is you have now two possibilities, that either while those paragraphs were being written, you had Jesus being watched by like a 10 News Network reporter, an ABC News Network reporter, and a Channel 9 network reporter, but they had to write everything down. And you'll have that while observing him, three reporters wrote in Koine Greek the exact same selection of words, in the exact same order, in the exact same phrasing, while insisting that they were to merit separate accounts of the same men. And what's the likelihood of that they would write that? And this is a language where, you know, as diverse as to have 7 different ways of saying love, like where you might say I love you. A father, there'd be a different word for love between a father and a son, love between a husband and a wife, love between a mother and a daughter, you know, all these different words for love. Roger and Gary and the Freemasons are trying to add one for essentially a love for the sense of being dodgy, in that by being part of a religion that's open enough to admit that it's secluded and secret and concealed, that it's therefore common sense that no one involved in it would ever try to impose ideals that require a deeper understanding of the religion onto anyone without making them a member, or else they would be abducting, and they most certainly wouldn't do that during paid work hours. So this idea that you know, that they endure with them pushing their morals and going, you know, a gay man is a person whose responsibility comes from the rebellion against his own sexuality. And we know this morally through our religion, Freemasonry, which ultimately falls back on the God of the Abrahamic religions in a state of rebellious and contentious argument with the all-male Luciferian character from the Abrahamic faiths as well. So they're 2 males in a state of rebellion, who Gary and Roger don't claim to be gay. And if they were gay, it would constitute them to a bias for being models of the definition of gay that they do promote. And by being members who have been open enough about the religion to admit that it involves this devil's advocate stance of rebelliousness against the Yahwinian God, that's male on male rebelliousness, which is the hallmark of a conflicted gay person requiring intervention by Freemasons sufficient that it helped them come out. Which is then by implication Roger Toll and Gary Cairns are supposed to come out of Freemasonry, because so long as they're in it, their gods are only going to sustain the inner conflict, and they'll continue to behave in rebellious ways. Now, those rebellious ways can involve abducting other people's children while they're and if they stuck to what the Commonwealth suggests and just went, well, boundaries in the workplace, boundaries. If someone wants to transgress a professional boundary, or let them know, if you have relating to your health and well-being, here's who you talk to. The public service did that much better. In my opinion, they did that much better, and said you can talk to this person about that sort of. But yeah, now They've also got the claim that Jesus was a martyr, and templative of martyrs. When they've arrived at this conclusion through doing what Christian harmonists do, which is where they take Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and merge them into one collative understanding, which is impossible because of the contradictions. Only the Freemasons do it to establish the definition of a martyr. And so because of the same clotting, they don't arrive at a sophisticated case to go, well, that's going to be a martyr there, that's going to be a martyr there. So as a result, they make what sort of errors? Well, any sort. But in principle, they'll find things you like, and by this I mean things like artistic material, song lyrics, like Walk Like an Egyptian, for instance. If you want to find all the cops, they'll be hanging out at the donut shop, and they might construe that this is about a person who, this person merits constant, endless neighborhood watch. They have a agenda against police. We've already seen them twice in recent weeks going to Donut King looking for a hot dog, based on everything we understand due to Freudian classic psychology and shapes. That even shows that within bread, which is a cherished edible product to a religious police officer, they're requesting and ordering hot dogs with, of all things, cheese, onion, and chili, which means they're trying to represent between the communal bread of the religious police officer that, it's like they're calling them cheesy. They're saying suck my dick. They're saying, they're saying all sorts of things. Maniacs, absolute maniacs, and they should be subjugated to neighborhood watch at all time. No, so what the existence of the Apocrypha and the canonical Gospels prove is that Jesus was written about to the extent that all of those Gospels exist. And not only that, but kingdoms didn't care too much to destroy the writings. Now, why that is fascinating and could have worked is because they were truly so inbred that, they're openly disclosing in Mark's Gospel why they bowled Jesus over, and even the words they use, why they charged him with taking on board a title that would only apply to even potentially apply to a monarch, a member of a kingdom. When the Jews were conquered and had no independent monarchy. So it was wrong to have asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And are you the slave of the slaves would have been a more appropriate question. But all that indicates is that people were watching him talk while in a community of conquered people, and he had gained a reputation for speaking in a way that was poetic and inspiring to his neighbors. Now that again would not have been a crime, but if he was naturally disposed to talking in more impressive ways than kingdom members, then this is again a proof that we know, like, species that practice cannibalism, that practice incest, drive themselves extinct. They don't get to pass on their genes. They drive themselves extinct, and that's the end of them. Now, these kingdoms would have gone extinct, and then those who, the commoners, would have risen up, gathered their scrolls, preserved their scrolls, and for a time they were taught as the only form of education possessible. So now, at the heart of matters, their hearts had to be so different that there was no way even for those pursuant of Jesus to go like, why you? What sort of ideas might you be trying to get across here? Like, they were too stupid to have a grasp or any grasp of that. Again, probably from inbreeding. But just the mere fact that all these books exist where they go, well, we want to write about this man, we want to write about this guy Jesus, we want to write about this guy Jesus, we want to write about... And that it was permitted by kingdoms that could have forbidden it. You see remnants of the serial killer that kills their victim, Jesus, and then keeps trophy after trophy, even writes more trophies. Like, now let's write another book to him where, he's killed, we've killed him, but then he comes back in some way. The symbology of them wanting him back, it's like on a psychosexual level here, that was like the total opposite of inbreeder patrol, and the opposite psychosexual constitute of an inbreeder is a bisexual. And that's why I think it should be recognized, or at least talked about more, or people should ask more. How can you explain? Because the principle of the mental health claim, all mental illnesses are due to genes, is when you contrast family down the street suffers from Down syndrome, all parents and the children, it's in their genes. When you contrast that with observance B, bisexual community suffers nervous breakdown, suicidal thoughts, depressions, all of this ensemble of mental illnesses, and then they sustain the claim in principle that genes are the cause of these mental illnesses. Then what it takes to add veracity to the latter claim is that all bisexuals are somehow in the same family, that they were raised by the same parents, grew up under the same roof, and emerged the whole community from the same house. Or the fact that these findings are coming up the way that they are, so that they're constantly contradicting the principle that mental disorders have something to do or are causally related to genes, is a lie made to fit the mold epistemologically of religion. You've got your, and bisexuals being the anomaly here, and you've also got the language of religion, and that the instinct of the religious believing themselves to be inbred being repulsive to bisexuals, in addition to the crucifixion being repulsive to bisexuals, resulting in a predatorial disposition, Christianity constituting a predatorial disposition towards bisexuals, because the claim Jesus is a supernatural lover of everyone is 2 points on their own that are enough to conceal while burying the idea that bisexuals are natural. Bisexuality goes into, non-conformity with, rock hard expectations of the constituencies of gender roles. So why can't a woman be just as capable of doing a job that a man can? As long as we're not locked in pods and milked for sperm, women's freedom should extend as far as they like. But none of which is in the Bible actually. Women are not to speak in church, even in the Bible. But once you really get into going, well, and it was getting called metrosexual for a while, but what constitutes a sufficient idiosyncratic ensemble that you would say, well, this is a male, this is a typical. It's the sort of idea is that there's really no such thing when you break it down. So I understand it as having more to do with that. There are traits and idiosyncrasies that you might prefer in romance, and so whether you're finding those traits that are making you happy, or in a female or a male partner is of secondary relevance. But yeah, the psychosexual opposite to King Herod and his castle, who were inbreeders both by practice for their bloodline purity and believed and representing it as sacred, inbreeding as sacred by the implications of their creation story. You've then got that by creed and by craft, they do indeed consider it devout to be incestuous. Then they're going to converge to pursue on a bisexual brain, a bilateral brain. It would be something that they would fascinate on, they would fixate on, they would kill the individual, and then make literary trophies out of him. He died of his own volition for our religion, our kingdom. He died for all of our. He died to fulfill all of our ancient scrolls going back 2,000 years. He died. He died because he loved King Herod's walking style. He died because, and that. So it would, But Marx gives you a good enough account of why it was a brutal and unjust killing. The other three let you see that, well, they're redecorative completely. Instead of Jesus being inappropriately asked if he's the king of the Jews, he's others are calling him the king. He's the author of the gospel is introducing him as the king. He's healing the sick, and the sick are calling him the king. And this contest with the king is you're left with, the reader's left with the impression of, well, this conflict, things were heading in this direction one way or another. It was bound to happen. Mark's gospel on its own, not only was it not bound to happen, but Jesus was the one being pursued. So the indecency was in the accuser's question, "Are you the king of the Jews?" to a slave named Jesus. Not that Jesus and his disciples were traveling and teaching against Bronze Age democracy or monarchs or whatever. So the fuck up on behalf of the accuser in Mark chapter 12 winds up becoming the bragsome march and bandwagon for Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, in the other three Gospels. Yeah, so, if you want more interesting stories, that I think, try and not make the origin story all about incest. There's something called tribalism. It began in Africa. A policeman said to me, do you reckon, so what, you just reckon the first man and the first woman just evolved? And I was like, yeah, the woman just evolved out of the man's rib. And the rest of us had to adapt, survival of the fittest. And no one's been able to find a replacement rib. Evolution can't even evolve a rib that is the fittest for the missing one, and that's why we miss our ribs to this very day, officer. No, I said, do you think there aren't such things as tribes? It began in Africa. We got to come out of swamps. There could have been batches of us, not inbred, and just rooting in swamps, and that's more plausible than your Adam and your Eve. Ning. Okay. Thank you for listening to and checking out my presentation. Remember the two the formula. Christianity is incestuously charged, biphobic, enslavement to abduction to torture to execution, followed by supernatural claims in concealment, threefold. Supernatural claims, concealment cubed to the tune of three accounts to change the nature of or rather to indemnify the unjust death in the original account by reintegrating it into the already widespread religion known to or native to the region in which the unjust killing took place to begin with. That it seems to parallel my opinion is that it's going to take, particularly in health and businesses that are concerned with the welfare of a person in one respect or another. I don't think Christian-based biphobia is going to impede a good hairdresser's ability to cut your hair the way you like. But I think in professions such as medicine, hospitals, I think where there are Hippocratic oaths, when you're in chemists, if a bisexual's death, mistreatment and death goes to a male Christian's erection and a female Christian's erect nipples and moist clitoris and vulva, then we've reached an impasse. And as if you can leave it to the Christians, we'll find a way to make sure that your book isn't assuring everyone that sacrificing those capable of loving all types of adults in a romantic context doesn't amount to conspiratorial mistreatment of bisexuals, as well as suppressing that bisexuality occurs in nature, through this idea that only one was sent, and only one loved everybody, and that one was prepared to die. You know, it's old, it's pathetic, and it's not even biblical. It's you know, there's no last words in the Gospel of Mark. He's dumped in a common grave. There's no resurrection. There's no official charge. There's no, my Father, why have you forsaken me? There's no, into thy hands I commit thy spirit. There's no mission complete. There's no Tom Cruise. There's no Tom Cruise joining Scientology after arguments with Nicole Kidman. There's no Stanley Kubrick wanting to film the whole thing. There's just, it's just Christian inbreeding biophobia into everyone's heads, and whether they're capable of doing something to rectify it, or whether the Commonwealth should improve the rights charter, leave to them to think about. But in the words of the Pope, I'm getting the cunt out of here right now, sluts.